and welcome to the Entertainment Science Fiction Programming Network, your entertainment sci-fi programming network. And so we say, bonjour, zao shanghao, zao an, ohayou gozaimasu, buenos dias, and hello. You can survive in the deepest parts of the ocean by planting plants that will grow that deep in the ocean. How's that? So we're going to talk about farming the ocean floor. Well, plants need sunlight because sunlight fuels photosynthesis. And photosynthesis is the process that plants and bacteria convert energy from light into fuel to survive. The deeper we travel into the ocean, the less light penetrates. So what can grow with extremely tiny amounts of light? There are a few plants that can survive and thrive with very tiny to no light. We'll talk about them. Red algae seaweeds. So these seaweeds are red because of the pigment phycoerythrin that helps plant photosynthesize in very little light. So this way, a red algae seaweed can thrive where green seaweed need lots of light in order to survive. Now, phytoplankton rely on sunlight to photosynthesize. So they're not in the deep. You're not going to find phytoplankton in the deep. However, when phytoplankton die, they go down to the deep, and the deep-dwelling invertebrates like crustaceans, known as amphipods, eat the phytoplankton to survive. Photoplanktons are the most abundant plants in the ocean. Scientists used to think that seagrass was only found in shallow water like 30 feet deep, until there were some scientists who were studying the Great Barrier Reef off Australia that discovered beds of seagrass 200 feet under the surface of the ocean. So in some of the deepest parts of the ocean, what happens is there are hydrothermal vents. And what's hydrothermal vents? Well, they're like fissures, openings that let heat escape from the Earth's core. So that deep in the ocean, these openings or fissures, these hydrothermal vents, heat comes out of them. And so that heat coming out raises the temperature of the surrounding area because it's freezing until the heat comes. It raises that temperature in that area. And what results? Bacteria grows there. And then fish eat the bacteria found in those depths. Now, and they have food to survive that deep because of that process, where they would not otherwise have survived. Bacteria, and you say eating bacteria, and that kind of sounds like, why would animals eat bacteria? Well, bacteria have some of the same genetic coding as plants, which takes bacteria and algae to another part of the sea or sea world. So bacteria and algae with the same genetic coding as plants, and animals who live that deep eat them. So that means that bacteria and algae can go into another part of the sea world that we're going to talk about right now. Let's talk about the River Jordan. The River Jordan flows into Yam HaMared. Yam HaMared is Hebrew, means killer sea. In English, we say the Dead Sea. So the River Jordan flows into the Dead Sea, and the Dead Sea is 10 times saltier than the ocean. The Dead Sea kills instantly any fish that goes into its waters. But bacteria and algae live in Yam HaMared. Archaea, bacteria, algae, cyanobacteria, protozoans. So these are halophilic organisms that depends on the high level of saline. So there's those organisms that live in this high level of salt, and they depend on this high level of salt. They thrive in it. They can't live without the high level of salt. So these creatures survive in the Dead Sea because of the bacteria and algae. So these creatures, similar creatures that survive in the dense dark, for instance, we talked about another podcast about the dense darkness and the creatures that live in this dense darkness. Did you miss that podcast? Go back and listen to it. Look at the listing of all podcasts and what lives down that deep in the dark we talked about. And we named some of the creatures that live there and thrive there. So go back and listen to it. And while you're listening to it, subscribe, like. We're on Facebook. Follow us on Facebook. We're on Instagram. Follow on Instagram. We're on TikTok. Follow on TikTok. Any podcast you listen to, Spotify, Apple, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, Overcast, we're there too. But every time you listen to a podcast, subscribe and like and follow. So creatures that live that in the dense darkness under this tremendous pressure, 2,000, 5,000, 6,000 feet below the ocean surface. You mentioned them. And so there's the same thing with creatures that survive in the Dead Sea, and they live because of bacteria and algae. So in the Aqua Phi, when you purchase your copy of the Aqua Phi, your book, and it comes to your home, you read it. We talk about this civilization that lives deep on the ocean floor. What do they build to live that deep, that can withstand this much pressure that low in the ocean floor? It's astounding. And the creatures they see is not, oh, well, they live that low and they see fish. No, we mentioned them in the past podcast, the type of creatures that live there. And they see those creatures every day because that's where they live. They watch them go by every day. When they have to enter the Aqua Phi, the most advanced ship ever made to escape, they travel even further down into the ocean floor. And then they enter a place where there isn't any water, down deep in the ocean floor. No water there. Water's ended. Then they meet in that area where there is no water, people who live in the dark, because that deep is pitch dark. You can't see anything. There's no light. But there's people who live in this darkness, and they see in the darkness. They see as well as you and I see in the light. How did that happen? Read about it. Go on to aquaphi.com, purchase it, read about it, and you'll understand how that happened. Get the merchandise that goes along with the novel. Subscribe on YouTube. Some people see in the dark. It's not surprising. Now, these people see as clear as we see in the light, they see in the dark, and that's not surprising. Why is that? Because they become nocturnal humans, similar to cats, wolves, mice, bats, owls, nocturnal animals. Okay, the retina in your eye has two structures, rods and cones that detect light and send the image to the brain. Rods captures very dim light and movement. Cones function under an abundance of light and helps us see colors. We have 4 times more rods than cones. So that ratio of 4 times more rods and cones that we have enables us to see very well during the day and kind of reasonably well to not very good at all at night. But animals like owls, foxes, have more rods and less cones than we do, and they see perfectly well. They see great in the dark. So in the Aqua Phi, what happened to these people that live in this place where there's no water? Why is there no water? So what happened to them that they see perfectly well in the dark? What shifted this ratio of rods and cones in their retina so that they can see perfectly well in the dark? Not going to give it away, but if you know the answer, read it, answer on Facebook, let me know what happened to them that made them see perfectly in the dark. What happened that dissolved this water so there's no water that far deep in the ocean? Purchase the Aqua Phi, read the novel, go to Facebook, find the Aqua Phi on Facebook, answer on Facebook. So we talked about in one of the previous podcasts what it takes for interplanetary travel. So if you go back and you look and you'll see a podcast called Interplanetary Travel. And so look through it. We talked about what it takes to do that. Intergalactic travel. What about deep down in the ocean, which is more difficult to travel than outer space? What does it take to travel deep in the ocean floor? What do we need in order to travel that deep in the ocean? We're going to talk about that on our next podcast.